Good morning all, and welcome to the August edition of DNA Dialogue. As we gather for this symposium, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognise the traditional lands from which we're coming together today. I'm joining you from Naarm, or Melbourne, the country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I would like to extend my respects to the elders, past and present, of this land and all the lands we live and work on, and acknowledge First Nations people joining us today. So DNA Dialogue is a forum for members of the genomics community in Australia and beyond to learn of new developments in health genomics and the overseas experience specifically. These seminars are held live via Zoom on the last Thursday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern. And recognising this can be a tricky time for many, particularly in the West Coast, or those with young kids schlepping them to school, recordings are made available on the Australian Genomics YouTube channel for you to watch at your leisure anon. So if you've attended these sessions previously, we like it to be interactive. So please do ask questions using the Q&A function of the Zoom platform. And I can pepper Rob with the questions at question time at the end of the presentation. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Rob Annan to this month's DNA Dialogue. As President and CEO of Genome Canada, Rob combines a background in genomics research with a deep knowledge of science and innovation policy and a proven track record in corporate strategy. He is committed to translating ideas and impact, and with the firm belief that science and innovation, equitably distributed, can make life better, he works with researchers, with policy leaders in industry across Canada and internationally to help realise the economic, environmental and social benefits of genomics. Rob, over to you to share your insights as to the strategy and priorities of Genome Canada, which I believe you're going to exemplify in the impact of two initiatives, All for One, Precision Health Initiative for patients with rare disease, and the Canadian COVID-19 Genomics Network. Rob, over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Tiff. Really appreciate the introduction as well as the invitation to join you here today. Good afternoon from Ottawa in Canada. Good morning to everyone joining in Australia. I also want to just acknowledge for a moment that that being in Ottawa, I am on the traditional and unceded territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people who remain vital to this area, and I'm very pleased that they continue to host us here. So I'm going to share my screen here, and as Tiff said off the top, I'm going to talk a little bit about Genome Canada, who we are, what we do, how we operate in the Canadian context, and then I'm going to drill in a little bit into a couple of our precision health initiatives as sort of examples of some of the opportunities, but certainly also some of the challenges that we continue to face, in the hopes that this could generate a bit of a dialogue. And I'll be happy to take not just questions and answers, but also comments and thoughts and so on in what is an ongoing dialogue kind of globally on a lot of these sorts of shared issues. So being as this far into the pandemic, I should be pretty capable here of sharing my screen, and I'm going to proceed assuming that you can see it.
That's good, Rob.
Okay, excellent. So a few words off the top about Genome Canada. So Genome Canada, we are an independent, not-for-profit organization. We were established in just over 20 years ago, in 2000, in the shadow of the Human Genome Project. In fact, Canada, and there's a little bit of a theme here, but Canada was maybe a bit of a laggard in terms of participation in the Human Genome Project. We had some great genomic scientists at the time, but we weren't involved in the international effort to sequence the human genome. And it was really the effort of those scientists here in Canada who convinced our government that it was going to be important for a real effort to be made in Canada in order to catch up, to build the type of foundation that's required to do really solid genomics research, as well as to then benefit from the knowledge that flows out of this kind of an initiative. So we were created in 2000 as an independent arm's length organization funded by the federal government, but operating independently of the government. As such, we actually have a really a bit of a unique model. We work with universities, industry, not just the federal government, but our provincial and territorial governments, as well as other partners, to build large-scale applied research projects. In genomics, and these are all designed to have real line of sight to impact. So we don't really get involved in a lot of kind of the more, I would say, basic and fundamental science, leaving that to our traditional funding and granting councils, but are really focused on the kind of implementation end of things, on commercialization, adoption, and impact. So very much in the applied research space. Somewhat uniquely, right from our very beginning, we were created not simply as a health research organization, but really as a multi-sector research organization. So we operate in three broad sectors. Roughly half of our work is in health research, but the other half is distributed across a variety of areas in, broadly speaking, food and agriculture on the one hand, and climate and the environment on the other hand. And I will say a few words about both of those as we sort of go forward here. We adopt a pretty broad definition of genomics, so we are not simply involved in sequencing work or in DNA work. We certainly are engaged in multi-omics, so we fund a variety of initiatives in proteomics, metabolomics, and so on and so forth. We also work broadly across, intersection with other data sciences in order to sort of look at the convergence of information and data, particularly as it relates to genomics, but goes beyond that as well. And we also have funded right from our very beginning significant sort of activities in effectively in the social sciences. In other jurisdictions referred to as ELSI, we've always called it GELS, or the sort of the research into genomics and its ethical, environmental, economic, legal, and social aspects. And in fact, in our large scale project, this GELS component has always been a requirement to be embedded right within any large scale project we're doing. So anything in health or agriculture or in the environment is going to have some GELS researchers involved to help understand the implications of the science that's being done. We are also actively engaged in Canada in what we think of more broadly as kind of genomics in society, particularly the intersection with policy, regulation, communications with the public or stakeholder groups. So we really do take a pretty broad view. While we invest significant funding into research, we continue to be active partners to government, industry, and others in terms of making sure that the genomics work that's being funded, finds its way to creating positive benefits. Increasingly, we are focused on inclusive genomics and ensuring that that the benefits that come from the work that we fund are shared by all, and that the work that we're doing reflects the people of Canada, in whether that's in data sets or the types of questions we're asking and so on. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Importantly, and this really does link into the conversation around health in particular, we do reflect the reality of Canada, which is a federation through a federated model and sort of an ecosystem approach. So while we operate nationally, we actually work with a broad cross-section of organizations in order to deliver on that national mandate. So it's not a federal mandate, it's really a national mandate. So we have a federated ecosystem approach to the work that we do. We work with 6 regional genome centers that are based effectively in our provinces. A couple of those centers cover a few different provinces, but they act as partners really sort of on the ground in those regions, both building links with the provincial governments, but also really understanding the realities of kind of local health needs, of local industrial opportunities, and other sorts of challenges. So it's a really a strategic but also operational partnership we have with these 6 regional centers. We have supported from our beginning 10 technology platforms. So this includes large sequencing centers, but also a variety of other platforms in data management, in proteomics, as well as in some of these GELS areas I was talking about around sort of data governance and so on. And then we have a broad spectrum of partners, including federal departments in, obviously health, but also in agriculture, environment, fisheries, natural resources, and so on, provincial government partners, but also, hospitals, public health units, lots of industry partners, whether that's small companies or multinationals, and a variety of foundations and other not-for-profits. So it really is a complex ecosystem, and we see our role as really conveners and coordinators across that ecosystem, bringing people together on shared goals. We do that through active project management. We aren't simply sort of a funding agency that funds research and sort of lets things roll out. We do have a very active and hands-on approach with our research teams, and we fund large-scale projects, and that, like I said, are very much on the applied side of the scale. So this is just a very brief, illustration of a number of the companies we work with. I won't dwell on this, but this is just a small sampling from the health side of things. Quickly on the numbers. This slide here is just an illustration of both kind of the work that we did last year, but really also kind of rolling up into the last 20 or so years. Annually, we fund anywhere from about 150 to 200 million dollars worth of research. Anywhere from kind of 40 to 50% of that is funded by the federal government, and the rest is funded by a variety of partners, like I've just mentioned. So these are really sort of built from the very beginning as collaborative research projects that involve not just participation, but funding from a variety of sources. That really does help ensure that there's kind of a shared purpose, as well as a broad objectives in any of the projects that we fund. We fund a lot of researchers, but also, in the end, there's a lot of impacts, scientific impacts certainly, but also economic impacts. Companies get spun out of our projects. We end up with a lot of IP being generated out of our projects, as well as a lot of trainees being supported through these projects. So it really is a kind of a broad spectrum of activities and impacts. This is just a very brief breakdown of that. Of last year's funding, which came in at about, I think, about $180 million all told. As you see here, you get the sense it's roughly a little more than half in health, particularly during COVID times, but still a distribution across a variety of other kind of segments and sectors, everything from agriculture to environment. We do a lot of work actually in energy and mining, particularly around kind of environmental impacts and clean energy, as well as forestry and fisheries. As we remind people, if it has DNA, you can do genomics. So we work across all of these areas. And over the last number of years, we've really adopted what we think of as a mission-driven approach to kind of solving big problems with genomics. 20 years ago when we started out, our sort of objective was really to lay the foundation for genomics in Canada. That foundation has now provided a great starting point. We've built from there, not just in Canada, but around the world. We now, while there's still lots of research to do, of course, we also have a good sense of areas where we know genomics can make a big difference. So we've really started to think about, okay, so what are the grand challenges in genomics, and how can we bring together a community of researchers, academic, industrial, and otherwise, to really kind of move the needle in a significant way in those areas. So we now adopt a kind of a portfolio approach where we have a variety of projects in a given area driving towards a common set of impacts, still very much multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary, and involving a variety of different stakeholders. So this kind of mission-driven approach is really kind of driving our overall program design these days. I'll say a couple words briefly here about the current, big challenge we've launched post-COVID, or, I guess we're not post-COVID, but after the flurry of COVID activities, we've launched a new initiative really looking at agriculture and food systems through the lens of climate, particularly around climate, climate change mitigation more than adaptation. But this is just an example of the kind of work we're doing now, where we're funding, still significant investments in large-scale research projects. We'll end up funding somewhere in the order of probably 7 or 8 different kind of research teams focused on different types of research opportunities in agriculture. But we also are now funding what we're thinking of as kind of these different kind of hubs that coordinate across those teams on key areas, like whether that is data coordination or whether that is around knowledge mobilization. So the intent here is really to ensure that the funding going into research projects adds up to just more than the sum of its parts, that we're actually creating opportunities through shared data, through shared knowledge mobilization, as well as coordination and collaboration across projects to really try to create significant impact in this case here when it comes to climate and our food systems. So a few examples of projects that we have supported in the past that may form part of this portfolio, everything from thinking about our fisheries, shellfish, sort of the fisheries are a big deal here on our coasts, of course. Thinking about, crops, microbiome, fertilizer use, thinking about resilience when it comes to our major food crops as well as livestock. So these are all obviously areas where genomics have a big role to play. Pulling these together into a coordinated approach really allows the teams to build on each other's knowledge and to combine their efforts into a bit more of a kind of a mission-driven approach. So that's a bit of a flavor of who we are and the sorts of things we'll do. I'm going to pivot now maybe to talk a little bit more about health and health research in genomics and our work there. Briefly, and I promise not to turn this into a kind of a geography or a politics lesson, but it is important to have a little context. And I think certainly there are similarities to the Australian experience here. In Canada, health is very much a complicated issue, a very complicated issue, largely because health care delivery is very much a shared responsibility between levels of government. So as you'll see here, Canada has 11 provinces and territories. We have a single payer kind of publicly administered system right across the board, but across all of those provinces and territories, you have very different approaches, very different details in how health is administered, very much, quite frankly, very siloed. At the federal level, there is the Canada Health Act, which establishes basic standards, but in terms of delivery, it varies greatly from province to province, and the responsibility is really at that provincial or territorial level. In addition to this, though, the federal government does have responsibility for healthcare delivery for Indigenous peoples on reserve, Inuit people in the north, as well as military and prisons, and there's a few other systems. So we have a broad array of health systems in Canada, and they do not play well together. Quite frankly, within provinces even, there are health units that have been, pretty significantly siloed. And so you end up with major challenges, particularly when you get into data sharing, that preclude any kind of large scale, kind of initiatives, which of course are at the foundation of precision health, kind of going forward. So this is the reality that we face. It's a reality that we've been wrestling with for a number of years in Canada, not just at Genome Canada, but in a variety of different areas. And it was really brought to the fore, of course, in 2020 when COVID hit. So when COVID arrived, we at Genome Canada, like others around the world working in genomics, recognized quickly that genomics had a big role to play in the response to COVID. And as such, we worked with our communities across the country, many of whom were all, launching initiatives, kind of grassroots initiatives in various kind of regions and provinces and cities. We pulled them together into a broad network that we called the Canadian COVID-19 Genomics Network, or CanCOGEN. And we launched two large-scale initiatives. One was, in effect, to do viral surveillance and to track both the spread within Canada, but also contribute to the global efforts to identify variants of concern and understand their spread, as well as a second, which we called VirusSeek. And then we had a second project to establish a cohort of roughly 10,000 COVID patients in Canada and sequence their genomes in order to establish a research base for looking at things like long COVID and so on. So that was called HostSeek. So these two initiatives we launched back in April of 2020. They were funded by the federal government for about $40 million. And we pulled together a broad consortium of, I think, a little bit over 100 members that included certainly academic researchers, but also federal and provincial public health units, hospitals, other healthcare partners, industry, and so on, as well as our big sequencing platform. So it was really an all hands on deck response to a very specific need and project. On the virus-seq side, and I'm happy to dive into more details in the Q&A if people are interested. But when we first received the funding, and I'm not sure exactly how things are in Australia, I don't imagine it would be too dissimilar. My assumption was, when you have $40 million, the big issue is all the provinces sort of arguing about, kind of their share of the pie, as it were, and how is the funding going to be distributed. In fact, the real challenges were not the logistics when it comes to funding, or even the technical issues when it came to doing the sequencing. A lot of it was just coordination and facilitating data sharing, and really confronting one of these persistent challenges we've had in Canada that had been sort of bubbling just at the surface for a long time. So we pulled together a network that was really built on the backbone of kind of a national public health network involving all the provincial public health labs, including our National Microbiology Laboratory and our Public Health Agency of Canada, but then bringing in expertise from the hospitals and universities and so on to really track the spread of the variants and to provide data to decision makers, the policy makers, in real time. And so to do that, we had to not only sequence the genomes, we had to build a lot more capacity in our system right across the board, including regional capacity where none existed. We had to do a lot of training and bringing people in-house, particularly around data bioinformatics. And we had to, perhaps the biggest challenge was actually to address longstanding issues around policy, but particularly around culture when it came to data sharing. And that involved establishing some new tools. So in the end, we had assumed we would sequence roughly 150,000 viral genomes. We are now up well above 400,000, which I guess is as much as a symbol of kind of the persistence of the pandemic as anything else. But we also were able to build out new surveillance capacity in 5 provinces that didn't have it previously. We were able to bolster the capacity in the other provinces that already had it, and we were able to connect them into the national ecosystem in a way that that existed but wasn't working perhaps as well as it could. And then we were able to get data moving slowly at first, really slowly at first, but over time that data started being shared into international databases like GSED, but also into a newly established portal that we built in Canada called the virus-seq data portal, which allowed for greater Canadian control as well as access for a variety of different purposes here in Canada. So so it took a little while to get kind of up to full speed in terms of getting past some of the barriers, but this has proven to be, I think, a really great opportunity to actually sort of find some solutions and build some momentum around some of these challenges that had been kind of persisting over time. The other side of the initiative was the HostSeq project. As I mentioned, this is the cohort of 10,000 patients. This is really based out of the CGen network, which is a set of 3 large-scale sequencing platforms based in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. They've really been driving this initiative, and it's really a kind of a project of projects. So a lot of the projects in Canada that were asking questions around whether it was the patient response to COVID or whether it was around long COVID have come together under this HostSeq banner to build basically a shared data set that is now built out and is providing data for a variety of other researchers both in Canada and around the world. So we're now at the point, these things take a little longer with regards to consent and so on, but we're now at the point, I think actually we are at about 10,000 samples sequenced now, and that data is accessible to researchers across the board. We are working to still establish, again, getting back to some of the data challenges, to do a better job of establishing linkages between the viral data and the host data. And this gets to some of the challenges we have in Canada around kind of management of metadata in particular, and electronic health records and so on. And this is a bigger issue than even for Genome Canada. We're working now with a variety of partners, both in the federal and provincial governments, in order to sort of address some of the continuing concerns when it comes to linking this kind of information. But we can come back to that. So I'll say here, and just in terms of some of our lessons learned on CanCOGEN, certainly data sharing, as I've underlined several times, is a critical issue. In the end, we actually did a deep dive on exactly what were the main drivers of those challenges, and came up with 3 three main issues. The first were technical issues, which were actually quite easy to solve. Different systems can be made to communicate, especially in a crisis. So the technical side was not so difficult. It just required, sort of people and investment. The second side was really around policy and regulation. I would say that a little more challenging, but again, there was certainly incentives for policymakers to collaborate and coordinate, and overcoming some of these policy issues proved not to be as challenging as initially feared. But the biggest issue was really around culture, and really around incentives for sharing, and what happens when you have distributed systems and you have risk and kind of potential downside being located in different places from where we really do see the benefits and upside, and aligning incentives is really a key element of aligning incentives and decision making is a key element of our conversations going forward. We did, though, also note that in Canada there had been a lot of siloing of effort between our public health, our hospitals, and our academics, and bringing those pieces together really leveraged the strengths of each side. It certainly created some challenges, especially in the early going, but those different strengths brought together really strengthened the overall effort, and is something that we're going to continue going forward. And then ultimately investments around analysis of data is going to be important, but that ultimately the big lesson for us is that progress is possible, and we continue to build on the momentum we've established here, and other initiatives across Canada in response to COVID have built as well, in order to try to address some of these long-standing issues for other areas going forward. So that's our COVID work. I'm going to pivot now to an initiative that launched pre-COVID and continues now. And there are certainly similarities to some of the challenges, and we've learned through the COVID experience how to sort of advance this. And this is really our All for One precision health initiative in rare disease. So the All for One initiative was launched about 5 or 6 years ago, and the idea here was to fund a network of researchers, all of whom would be required to partner with their provincial health authorities on implementation projects for bringing genomics into the clinic. So this is really designed to make genomics kind of a standard of care for pediatric rare disease in Canada. And as such, we wanted to fund the clinician researchers, but also in collaboration with the public health units that would be required as partners going forward to actually adopt and implement a lot of the findings here coming out of this. So our All for One initiative is really still seen in many ways as a bit of a pilot initiative. We really started, with, and I'm sure there's many on the call here who are well acquainted with these types of initiatives in other countries, but we started with rare disease because certainly here in Canada, the community is reasonably small. I mean, it's spread out, we're a big country, but in terms of the number of researchers involved and the number of hospitals, it's a manageable size relative to something like, say, cancer, for instance, and it's already, employing a fair bit of genomic work in terms of diagnostics and so on, and research. So it was really meant to sort of serve as a bit of a pilot study for how we can address some of the systemic issues for precision health in Canada. And the idea being that we can establish a system in rare disease, we can then build on that and roll that out to tackle some of the other bigger questions when it comes to broader issues of health. So really, these are just a sort of a set of some of the key activities under that initiative. Certainly, the sequencing side of things is really important, but we're very much engaged on questions and issues around data governance. Sort of the health data sharing is a major focus, as I've sort of pointed out, but also looking at patient and community engagement, and ensuring that we have patients at the heart of all of these projects, but also in the design of kind of how the system is implemented is going to be absolutely crucial. And then, of course, professional engagement education for the healthcare professionals that will be involved in actually doing implementation. So it's really designed as a bit of a comprehensive approach, designed as kind of implementation projects, but multidimensional, I would say. So again, we work with our regional genome centers on this in order to build out across the country. I won't get into the details here, but just to say that we have the regional projects that really drive the overall kind of direction of the project. But we have a couple of these hubs, like I talked about on the agriculture side, one on data sharing and one on a policy toolkit that are really designed to be shared initiatives that are going to help establish common protocols around data governance as well as around data sharing. So this project has been certainly impacted by COVID over the last couple of years, as all of our projects have been, but continues to be very active, very vital, and making significant progress, which we're excited about. I won't go through all of this, but just to say that there are challenges that the project is designed to address, and they tend not to be technical. They tend to be around policy, around governance, around legal frameworks, and so on. And so we work with partners across our ecosystem to advance on all of these fronts. So concluding with a couple of slides here, just to say, as we look ahead, these initiatives have certainly consumed a lot of our time the last little while. We are preparing to launch a small initiative, which really is meant as a bit of a seed initiative around antimicrobial resistance. And this very much is in our wheelhouse because of the One Health approach to AMR that takes into account not just the human health aspects, but also the elements around agriculture and antibiotic use, as well as environmental kind of implications in AMR, and really tries to bring together the various pieces into a kind of a holistic view on this. We're building out from the investments and infrastructure that's been built up around some of our surveillance for the VirusSeq project, and we'll be leveraging that to be looking at, for instance, wastewater as a way to track emerging pathogens, as well as AMR related genes, and a variety of other projects, some of which are flagged here. So this is something we expect to launch in the next year or so, or in the next probably 6 months or so, but that will really be just kind of a first step towards a much larger and a shared global effort, because of course countries around the world are coordinating, collaborating to tackle what is clearly a global issue. Before we wrap up, I just want to say just a couple of words about our approach towards inclusive genomics, particularly when it comes to health. I don't think with this crowd I need to get into detail about some of the challenges, the historic exclusions from data sets, from the types of research questions being asked. When it comes to genetics and genomics, we take this very seriously, and we're very committed at Genome Canada to addressing some of these issues. One project we launched a few years ago and are supporting in British Columbia is called our Silent Genomes Project. It's really focused on kind of reducing disparities and improving access for Indigenous populations currently in British Columbia, but with a view towards expanding broadly across Canada. There is one objective is to build out an Indigenous background variant library, which will be important and helps fill in a significant gap. But actually a lot of the work is being done really around questions of governance and policy, and there's a lot of innovation happening here that I think will actually be really valuable across all of our health activities. But of course, when it comes to data governance, there are significant issues, particularly around the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and so on, that we are working hard to respect and take into consideration in order to build out a better kind of long-term strategy around addressing some of these inequities. And we also support the summer internship for Indigenous peoples in genomics. I believe this initiative is also active in Australia. We have sort of a chapter or what have you here in Canada that we've now supported for a couple of years, based out of the University of Alberta, which is really meant to provide Indigenous students hands-on experience in either the class or lab or field in genomics to build out more capacity among Indigenous peoples in Canada around genomics. So this remains a major focus for us, and not just in health, but across our other portfolios as well. So I'll conclude with just a last couple of words here to say that there are certainly challenges and opportunities. You can tell I'm still maybe just a little scarred from the battles we've had around data sharing and genomics in health. The federated model we have in Canada, and I know that Australia has federated approach as well in a variety of areas. That this certainly poses challenges, particularly around data sharing. Kind of a command and control centralized approach, particularly in a pandemic, can be very valuable. And we saw that in some other jurisdictions. But I do believe that over time, a federated model has real opportunities and advantages. It does force tough conversations around, privacy. It does force questions around, governance. It does force, maybe some opportunities to think about different approaches based on regional realities. And so, I remain optimistic that we can solve the challenges, and that in the end, we may be better off for them, having had some of the tougher conversations we've had to have. Just to underline going forward, the need to remain focused on diversity and inclusion. And I talked here a little bit about Indigenous populations in Canada. Of course, there are other populations that have been historically excluded in Canada and around the world, but I think globally as well, as countries that are, contributing significantly to, global data sets and so on, we need to make sure that we're also cognizant that the benefits that come from open data aren't always shared equitably globally either. And that's something that that we see even now during COVID as we think about vaccine access, for instance. So countries like Australia and Canada, I think, have a responsibility to ensure that we're also certainly, sort of representing those that that aren't being represented within those data sets and aren't accruing the benefits. One thing we think about a lot at Genome Canada is convergence with other technologies, particularly the convergence of genomic data sets and artificial intelligence, machine learning. Large data analysis is going to be, is obviously a major, kind of growth area when it comes to genomics. Thinking about how those two things intersect, as well as with, kind of the tools coming out of SynBio, major investments happening in Canada, certainly around biomanufacturing. There's lots of a huge opportunity, huge potential in this. I'm very much an optimist, but at the same time, when we see what has happened in the tech sector over the last 20 or 25 years, innovation run amok without some thoughts towards kind of what some of the disruptive impacts can be, is a potentially dangerous outcome. So we need to be thoughtful and cognizant about how we move ahead with the convergence of these technologies, certainly. And then, of course, just to acknowledge that precision health, and even COVID are not the only kind of realities that we're facing right now as we think about shifting geopolitics. What does that mean for kind of open collaboration globally? What does that mean for open global data sets? And how do we continue to confront some of the challenges that are sure to continue emerging, whether that are current outbreaks around monkeypox or God help us, around polio, or future things? I think that we need to keep front of mind that we are in this together, and we need to ensure that there's ways for us to collaborate globally on issues of science. So I'll finish there, I think, and perhaps I'll end my slideshow and ask Tiff to join us, and happy to take any comments or questions.
Rob, thank you very much. What a fascinating presentation. And I think certainly there's a lot that resonates there in terms of similar experiences and certainly structures and challenges that we encounter in Australia that you've shared from the Canadian perspective. So thank you very much. We have got a number of questions already. So Marion and Michael have both touched on that federalism and both the challenges and opportunities that lie in this structure. And you have touched on that just in the last in your closing statements. I guess, what do you think that Australia could potentially learn from the Canadian experience in the context of genomics?
So, well, that's a good question. Ultimately, we're all learning from each other. I think if I were to think about a couple of the strengths that, a couple of things we've learned along the way that I would impart now. One is that actually having a multidisciplinary focus is really valuable, particularly for countries like Canada and Australia. I think Canada and Australia are similar in many ways, economically, especially when I think about economically, large land masses, relatively small populations for those land masses, economies built largely on natural resources, and investments in so that's all true. When we think about health genomics, there are large investments being made for good reason. Health genomics really does offer great promise for, improving, kind of our health outcomes, improving new precision medicines and so on. So there's a lot of activity in those areas. it's possible to leverage those kinds of investments to actually create opportunities and benefits in some of these other economic sectors. When we're thinking about mining, for instance, Australia is a big mining country. Canada's a lot of mining in Canada. The investments we've made in understanding, say the microbiome, and that could be, in the health context, the investments we've made in some of our technologies and technology platforms, those investments are now being used to help actually identify, for instance, microbial communities involved in the cleaning up of tailings ponds in our oil sands sector, or in helping identify or clean up, kind of oil spills in the north and so on. So that kind of crosstalk between health and other sectors is really valuable. And we've found that, while there's research like that happening in lots of different places, siloing it out means that you often don't get to leverage those investments more broadly, because they tend not to sort of have the kind of I don't know, the connections or the opportunities to sort of move from one side to the other. So I think that's been really valuable for us. The second thing I would say is we've really, on the health side particularly, I think we probably underestimated, if I go back, say, a decade or more, we probably underestimated the need to really truly involve the health policy decision-making apparatus in a lot of our research program design. So I think there was a bit of a feeling that, it's kind of like, if you build it, they will come, right? You create the opportunities, you build out the economic arguments. Our GELS research had health economists, helping underscore the benefits, the cost benefit analysis of implementation of new technologies. And you assume, okay, great, we've demonstrated that this, new, prenatal testing, sort of approach is really valuable. People will just adopt it. And that's just not the case. And there's probably lots of reasons for that. But if you involve those provincial health decision makers earlier, they're able to help shape kind of their needs and their ideas and their interests in terms of our thinking, and we are able to feed into their longer term strategic planning and so on, the kinds of things that we're able to support. So that coordination, I think, is very crucial, and is something that we didn't, I think, recognize because we weren't embedded within the real kind of health implementation community in those early days.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge that we encounter here in Australia too. And I think, just from your description of the shared responsibility of funding of health delivery in Canada, it's probably a little more cut and dried in Canada, because there's sort of areas of responsibility from the federal perspective versus the provincial perspective. But our states and territories and our federal allocation and shared responsibility and payment is much more, it's a dark art.
Yes, absolutely. You're exactly right.
Yeah. All right. So Louise asked a question. So you were talking about the importance of sort of cross-disciplinary work and making connections between different areas of genomic activity. I guess the corollary of that is touched on by Louise, where she's asking, how do you manage competition between project interests? For example, with boosting or increasing animal food chains or environmental impacts. How do you manage those tensions, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And actually, balancing those tensions was one of the real motivators for shifting towards a much more kind of mission-driven portfolio approach. Yeah. So I would say, if we go back, say, 5 or 10 years, we did in effect run funding competitions that were pretty wide open, pretty agnostic about what came in, and we employed international peer review panels to establish, what were the, kind of maybe the greatest opportunities for research advancement and application in a given sector, like, say, agriculture or what have you. And then we would get a variety of different projects, and they were really optimized along basically a single dimension, right? And so the identification of that dimension was pretty crucial. But if it was economic impact, then it was economic impact. or what have you.
Mm.
The idea of the kind of mission-driven approach or the challenge-driven approach is that we ask the question at the very beginning, what are the impacts we really want to create here? And we make sure that when we have that conversation, we involve a broad kind of array of voices, not just the industry voices, but certainly government, the funders of the work, the government partners and so on. What are their key policy priorities? What are some of the community policy or community priorities? And where does the science kind of lead in terms of opportunities? And we bring together as a kind of we have a science and industry advisory committee that helps kind of, in a sense, coordinate that conversation. And so when, for instance, on the most recent mission that we've just launched on food and climate, we realized that we did want to see really positive potential for economic impact, but it also had to have a kind of climate mitigating element as a key impact of the overall project goal. So instead of kind of, I guess, optimizing along a single dimension, we can optimize along a couple of dimensions and then build a portfolio that will actually allow us to address those. And we still have peer review, we still have external evaluation, but when they come back to us, they're actually giving us their analysis and evaluation across those couple of different dimensions. So we can now think about, not simply the quality of the science, which has to be high, but also elements of environmental impact, equity, so on and so forth.
Yeah, very interesting. We should share our various our different evaluation frameworks for projects at some point. I'd love to have a look at that. So a number of people, I think you've really touched on a pain point around the challenges of sharing data between jurisdictions, let alone internationally. And it's certainly keenly felt in Australia. And there's a few questions relating to sort of using the urgency of CanCOGEN to accelerate change in that sort of data sharing and policy perspective. So there's questions from Marion and Naomi along these lines. Can you speak to the incentives from the jurisdiction or from the provinces that you've used to change data sharing culture, as well as sort of the more policy aspects, the regulation? And, do you envisage that the changes that have been put in place can now be retained, or do you think there's an impetus to return to the status quo and sort of silo down again?
Yeah, great. I'm happy to talk about this at greater length. Probably I could go on it at far too great length, so I'll try to be somewhat more
I'll cut
brief.
you off at some point.
Yeah. No, but just to say, first of all, I don't want to give the impression that this has all been solved in Canada, because it is far from the case. We have found, I would say, some solutions and or workarounds for some of the major issues. And we have, I think, really put a spotlight on what the challenges are. And that's not just us at Genome Canada, that's across a lot of different kind of COVID initiatives who were all frustrated by the inability to move on this. And in fact, the federal government established an expert panel. I mean, this is what governments do, but I'm hopeful about this one. They established an expert panel, I think the Pan-Canadian expert panel on health data sharing or some such thing. And I think what was interesting was that their first recommendation that came out of this was not, everyone should adopt this system or everyone should, whatever, but really was to convene a shared convene a conversation around a shared objective, and to ensure that there is basically a shared charter for Canada and the provinces towards data sharing as an objective, to establish this at the highest levels, to say, yes, we all do actually commit to doing this, and to give that just enough of a bit of a stamp that turns it into a priority that can then be used to kind of work your way not down the chain but through the web, because it really is an issue. One of the issues is just a lack of kind of decision making and accountability, right? If I would talk to a provincial cabinet minister or a deputy minister, right, the head of that kind of department in the provinces, they would be shocked and dismayed that the data wasn't being shared, right? They wanted the data shared, but there's no one who actually has the key, right? The key is shared across, a dozen or more different kind of decisions, whether, all the way from kind of the local, from the hospital, the local health unit, and so on and so forth. Some of that is systemic. The province of Ontario has 34 regional health units, each of which has its own data privacy officer.
Mm,
So, to get 34 signatures to get data released just in a single province is obviously, it's just onerous, right? So there's some systemic issues there that I think, we can address. But this whole system, I think, was built understandably around the idea of individual privacy, right?
mm,
And so data and information was very much thought to reside with the individual, maybe with the hospital, in order to reduce the potential for kind of privacy problems. Therefore, the incentive, and that still exists, right? Having someone's privacy kind of get blown up would be a major problem for any health unit. And
mm,
so the people that are responsible at that health unit for ensuring that that doesn't happen, of course, have disincentives towards just kind of moving the data up the chain and making it releasing it to other people, who will have different responsibilities for it. Now, I will say that things are shifting as we get towards a much more precision health approach, because of course you need data. And so whether, if we're thinking about, even something like diagnostics,
mm.
there's probably no jurisdiction in Canada that has a large enough population base to do this on their own,
Yeah.
right? They have to work collectively. And so, I mean, some of our provinces have got, no more than a couple 100,000 people. Even Ontario, our largest province, has only got about 10 million people.
Mm,
So that's not really enough to do big population size genomics. So there is, I think, a growing recognition, and of course, not just us, but patient groups, advocacy groups, and so on are making the case that we really do need large data sets, and that really does require coordination and collaboration. So I think the incentives are changing, but it is honestly like fighting with a sponge. Doesn't matter what you do and grab, it just absorbs and kind of reforms. And so I think this idea of kind of setting a bit of a standard of saying, look, we're going to start with a charter that we all
mm,
agree to, that we need to do this. Now, what does that mean as we work our way through the system? Gives a bit of a
mm.
systemic approach.
Yeah, and it really is that changing that pervasive risk-averse culture around data sharing as well. All right, very interesting. Look, we've had a couple of questions too. I mean, you spoke about silent genomes, which is such a fabulous project and initiative, and emphasise Genome Canada's sort of embedded strategy for inclusive genomics. We have had a couple of questions around, well, what is the role of First Nation peoples in sort of designing and deciding on research areas? So I guess, these initiatives, SING and Silent Genomes, are they sort of working in parallel to Genome Canada's other activities, or are they actually embedded so that the voice and the priorities of Indigenous peoples are then carried through in project and strategy?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'll be quite candid. We feel like we're very much still in the early stages of this kind of journey. We have supported projects for a number of years that involve partnerships between Indigenous communities and researchers from universities and so on, and that's true in health, but actually it's more true, I would say, in a lot of our natural resources. So we have fisheries projects, for instance, that
Yeah.
combine kind of traditional knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, with kind of genomic technologies in order to sort of understand historical populations of kind of fish migration and so on. We do similar things in energy and so on. So there's a history, I would say, of really good kind of co-creation and collaborative work at the project level. And so, we continue to support that. What we're trying to do now, though, I think, is to actually have greater involvement and coordination with Indigenous peoples at the strategic level. And this is something we're still learning how to do. We have a variety of Indigenous, well, either members of our board or our community more broadly that we can reach out to through our centers, for instance, who are informing us on how to approach this. But we are going, to be honest, a little bit slowly, because we want to make sure that we get some of these kind of system level things right. Having said that, we are building out from some of these investments on things like silent genomes to be able to leverage the expertise being built up there to inform work we do, say, for instance, in large scale cohort design more broadly across Canada, to inform conversations we're having around the creation of the host-seek
Mm.
population cohort and so on. So that expertise is coming online more broadly into overall project design, but it's still, I would say, still very early for us. We continue to kind of find our path on that.
Well, as are we. I mean, we've got
Yeah.
a long history of broken trust that we have to rebuild, as well as building Indigenous genomics capacity to be able to contribute at all levels and lead these programs. So, yeah, it's
Exactly
certainly
right.
something we share. I guess, another question that is really topical for Australian genomics at the moment is thinking about, so we've got members of the community that are very interested in genomics. They're sort of engaged with recreational genomics. They want to get a scarf that's got their sort of DNA code on it. Then there's the equivalence of the vaccine hesitant groups that are very distrustful of genomics, the sort of spectre of looming of, the information that could be manipulated from, testing from their genomics, sharing their genomics information. Have you, particularly as we're moving into an era of more population screening or asymptomatic screening, which has huge health system benefits, how is Canada tackling these issues in terms of engaging, bringing the whole community along with us, even those that, might be less or be more hesitant about embracing the genomic age?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think there are a couple of points I'll make here. I think one is it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard. We're living in very difficult times, and issues around misinformation and disinformation are a lot bigger than genomics. And so, we are part of that complicated kind of social communications mix, and we do our part to try to, fight the good fight. So on a broad strokes, we are somewhat dismayed, but certainly committed to trying to do the right thing as our, kind of all of us in kind of the broader science community. When it comes to so there's a couple points. I'll talk first about regulation, and I'll talk about maybe about kind of public opinion. I think on the regulatory side, governments are trying very hard to get this right. And I talked a little bit about kind of that risk aversion. I think that continues to exist, which is a source of some frustration for patient groups, for instance, who are advocating for, more open, data access and data sharing. But it's also, in a sense, contradicted by the, certainly tens of thousands of Canadians who have shipped their DNA to 23andMe or to,
Yes.
Ancestry.com, and, not just giving it away, but paying them to take it, right? I mean, so you have this range, as you say, and policymakers are trying to find the right balance there. And certainly I would say in Canada, we tend to err a little bit probably on the side of caution, which misses out on the opportunity for innovation and impact in many of these areas. So we work with the government to help them, I think, understand the risk and help mitigate the risk through, some of the work we're doing around kind of data governance and so on and so forth. But we also just recently conducted a large scale survey of the Canadian population with regards to its opinions on genomics. And we found a couple of really interesting things I think might be relevant. One is that, in fact, that kind of core group of the kind of anti-science crowd or whatever was maybe a little smaller than I had feared, or that I sort of thought that, especially given everything we hear about vaccine hesitancy and so on, genomics maybe doesn't quite register enough to attract that kind of a spotlight. But it was somewhere, maybe 10 to 12% of people were just kind of like, oh, I don't like this stuff with DNA and we shouldn't be playing God, just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Everyone else, now the hardcore enthusiasts were not a huge group either. You had sort of like a 25 to 30% group who were just, I think, overall positively inclined. So you had a large group in the middle, which I think is an opportunity. What we found through the questions was that the closer you got to application, the more positively inclined people were. If you asked theoretical questions, do you think we should be manipulating DNA and playing God, right? People were like, well, that sounds pretty awful, right? But if you asked, are you in support of cell and gene therapies that can cure, cancer or childhood rare disease? Are you in favor of, gene therapies that could reduce, pesticide runoff and so on? Like, you ask these types of questions, people are like, actually, yeah, that sounds really good. That sounds really good. Even when they know the technology behind it, right? That they understand it is that kind of, you are talking about, kind of working with DNA. The application really shifts the thinking. So I think that there's a lesson in there that we've taken away, certainly, that I find just the science itself pretty mind-blowing and fascinating, but it's actually that impact on people's lives, that if we can actually improve health, if we can actually improve environmental impacts, and so on and so forth, people are ready to embrace the technologies.
The so what message.
Yeah,
The
so
technology's great. Yeah, great. Excellent.
Yeah.
Rob, I think you and I could keep chatting away for ages, but everyone's got to get on with their day. Thank you again for joining us. It's been really lovely hearing from you about Genome Canada's strategy and your experiences. And I think there's certainly a lot of parallels and I'm sure many opportunities for collaboration. So thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff. I've really enjoyed it, and all the best to all of you, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Excellent. Everyone, just quickly, the next DNA Dialogue seminar will be held on September 29th and will feature Richard Milne from the Wellcome Connecting Science. And he will be discussing sort of public perspectives on sharing genomic and health data, further outcomes and future directions of the Your DNA, Your Say study. So it's been a lovely morning. Thank you very much. I hope you have an excellent day. I look forward to seeing you next month at our DNA Dialogue seminar. Bye all.